on the presentation. Hopefully you can see my screen. Delighted to say that we're joined by Jeff this week, who's going to, as you can see on the screen, talk to us all about how to assess what insurance covers your business needs. Now, Jeff's on his phone today, so I'm going to be his glamorous assistant in terms of changing the presentation. So probably every now and again he'll be putting that to me. If anyone does have any questions as we go through, you've probably seen on the bottom there is a Q&A box for you to put them in. I'm sure Jeff will be happy to answer them as we go along. And also obviously we've got the chat box as well that you can use. This session is recorded, so if anybody does have any wants to watch it back further afterwards, just let us know and we'll put that. And for the people in the Northern Affinity, it'll be on our workplace as well. So without further ado, I'll pass you on to Jeff and he can introduce himself and yeah, we can go from there, Jeff.
Okay, thanks very much, Mike. Okay, good morning, everybody. My name's Jeff Dunn. I'm an independent commercial insurance broker working for Spencer Hayes Group. We have an office across in Rottenstall in Lancashire and an office based spookily in Stanningley in Pudsey at the Northern Affinity headquarters. So my little walkthrough today is around understanding the considerations for yourselves in terms of business insurance in respect of protecting your business, your people and your assets. Now that can vary obviously from a one-person operation up to perhaps 250 staff in a large manufacturing business and anywhere in between. That's really the range of my clients and the range of my experience. Okay, so Mike, if you could just wind on one. Okay, I've done the introduction, the purpose of the workshop. And if we could move to one of my favourite TV programmes straight away, which would be Homicide: Life on the Street. Next slide, please, Mike. And again. Right, we're going to start with a fully interactive quiz, just to get us all going this morning. I'm going to ask you 2 or 3 questions. You can put the answers in the comments box at the bottom. You can just keep it to yourself. It's absolutely up to you. So first of all, in relation to someone who is self-employed with no employees, okay, and that's quite a lot of the members of Northern Affinity, how many out of 10, how many have no business insurance whatsoever? So that's how many self-employed people running their own businesses with no employees, how many of them have no business insurance whatsoever? Keep the answers coming through or keep them to yourselves. Question 2. Of firms with more than 10 staff, how many out of 10 are inadequately insured? So that's firms with more than 10 staff. How many out of 10 are inadequately insured? And the third question, of all people who run businesses who have insurance, how many out of 10 don't even review their insurance annually? So they're just 3 little questions. It's not a catch you out thing, it's just an interest thing. Mike, have we got any answers coming through, or shall I just actually cough them out?
So we have Phoebe, who has said 7 for the first question, 6 for the second, and 9 for the last.
Okay, that's pretty close. That's pretty close. Okay,
Excellent.
I'll go over those again. So self-employed, no employees. How many of them don't have any business insurance at all of any description? The answer is 4 out of 10. For the second question, out of firms with more than 10 staff, how many of them are inadequately insured? And the answer is at least 4 out of 10. Like Phoebe, I believe that answer should be higher in real life. And then thirdly, of everybody who's in business who has business insurance, 7 out of 10 people don't review their insurance annually. So they're 3 quite interesting snapshots of what's going on at the moment.
Why do you think they do that, Jeff? Why do you think they do that? Check it annually?
Good question, mate. I think it revolves around a thing called customer inertia. And we've seen this with bank and building society accounts and private motor insurance for private individuals. People quite often get the bill through for the motor insurance, have a moan about it, often understandably having a moan about it, but then don't make the time to do anything about it in terms of doing research and shopping around. But it's quite a stark figure, isn't it? 7 out of 10 don't review annually. And it worries people like me to death, or could worry people like me to death. For this reason, a business can change, move, adapt very, very subtly over a period of time, i.e. 12 months, particularly if the business has gone through a growth period. So a couple of what-if questions. What if the business had insurance arranged, maybe by themselves, that now doesn't do what it should do going forward to protect them? And secondly, what if they've bought the wrong insurance in the first place? Again, perhaps if they've self-served from the internet. We'll explore that in a bit more depth as we go along. Okay, so thanks to everyone for applying yourselves to those 3 questions. We'll now move on to an area that I've called the specialist. Okay, now there are really 3 options in terms of who's the specialist when it comes to insurance advice. So the first one, which I've touched on already, is a self-serve online option. So that is, I've started a business and I think that I need X, Y, and Z insurances. Perhaps I've overheard people talking about them. Perhaps when I was an employee, I overheard people in my workplace talking about them, people that were responsible for the insurance. Or I just think, actually, I know best. Okay, so for certain business insurances, there is the opportunity to go online and self-serve. But that presupposes, I guess, that the individual doing that knows exactly what they need. And so my first challenge would be, does someone who is an expert in their particular field of business, are they also an expert on business insurance? Question mark. The answer is probably not. The second option is, and this is in quotation marks, my friend says I just need X, Y, and Z for my business insurance. Okay, good of your friend to give you some advice. Question, is your friend an independent commercial insurance broker? If they are, great. If they're not, what is the basis on which they've given you that advice? They don't know your business back to front. You'll have told them what you do, but can they then transfer that into, therefore you need to protect the following things? The answer again is probably not. The third option in terms of specialism is, why don't you seek out the advice of an independent commercial insurance broker? The advice is free, by the way. It's also not binding. You don't have to go ahead with the recommendation when you sit down with an insurance broker. But the one thing they will do for you is show some interest in your business, complete a fact find all about your business, and only when they've done that can they go away and come back to you giving you a thing called best advice, which, as the name suggests, is probably the route or the advice or the products that you should consider buying to protect your business. Okay.
Jeff,
So
do you think, sorry, if you might ask a question, do you think that people quite often go ahead and do it themselves because they may be used to doing that in the other areas of life? So let's use car insurance as an example. You know, you type your registration number in, and that's kind of it, really, and you choose your cover and go ahead. Do you think it's kind of just we are used to doing it, so they kind of assume it's similar for business?
I think you're absolutely right, Mike. I think it applies particularly more so to people who are sole traders, people who just have started their own business, and you know, they're cracking on with their particular area of specialism, and that, you know, they genuinely believe they can buy the insurance they need online. Okay, and they probably can. However, most of them just buy one or two covers and leave themselves open, or as we call it, exposed or exposure to certain risks, quite often unknowingly, and that's where the difficulty arises. The key probably is, as is the case perhaps with banking, building society, mortgage advice, protection advice, why not sit down with someone who is an expert in that field, get the advice, and then you choose whether you act on the advice or not. That's probably the way to go, Mike.
Thank you, Jeff.
Okay, moving on. Let's get into entity. So what I'm meaning by this is what types of business are there out there? So we've got sole traders, we've got partnerships, of which there are various types. There's also a thing called an LLP, which is a limited liability partnership. And then there's the last one, which is a limited company. Now, quite often I see firms who ask me, or individuals who ask me, I want this, this, and this, and I don't want employer's liability cover. Okay? And I listen when they say that, but it's a legal requirement that all businesses with at least one employee or more than one director have employer's liability cover. And occasionally I come up against someone who's resistant to it. In reality, the cost of employer's liability is normally very reasonable, and it offers a wide range of cover. And again, more of that a little bit later on. So that's covered entity. Okay, Mike, if you could just flip the slide for me. Okay, I've called this slide, or this area of discussion, making sense of it all. So if someone's come on the journey with us or with an insurance broker, and they've decided they're going to take professional advice, there's a number of considerations, and those considerations apply in two ways. One, for the person who wants to arrange the insurance, and two, for the person like myself who is the advice giver. So let's start with people. What we need to do here is protect the people in the business from all angles. Okay, so what people aspects are there to consider? First one would be employees of company. Second one would be yourself, if you just work for yourself, or yourself if you're in one of those four entities. The next one is customers and suppliers. And the last one is the firm. Okay? So employees would definitely need to be protected by employer's liability insurance. The self, which could be you as an individual, you in a partnership, or you in the different types of entity, you would need public liability insurance, professional indemnity insurance, and customers and suppliers, you would need to protect yourself to make sure you're covered in relation to your interaction with your customers and suppliers with public liability insurance. And then lastly, in quotation marks, the firm, if it's a limited company, or in some cases the LLP, limited liability partnership, there are various insurances that you need to consider. which again would be the employer's liability, public liability, professional indemnity, and also a thing called directors and officers cover. Again, more of that a little bit later on. If we move now to places, where do you need to be protected? Well, the answer, if you're running a business, is everywhere, isn't it? So most examples of this would be you need to be covered at home if you run your business from home or do some home working. If you use Northern Affinity, as I do, you need to be covered in your shared workspace area. You need to be covered for all visits to see clients and all clients coming to see you. And again, all visits to suppliers or partners and suppliers or partners coming to see you. If you produce something and you then transport it, you need to be covered for sending things from A to B. So that would be known as goods in transit cover. And then where do you need to be covered? Sounds obvious, but you've got a number of options. You could just be covered everywhere in the UK. You could be covered in UK and Europe, or you could arrange cover, depending on the goods or services you provide, on a worldwide basis. Okay, so there's quite a few considerations there in the first two things that I've outlined: protecting people in all aspects and places. The next thing I want to talk about is things. Okay, I pick these words sometimes to be quite provocative or thought-provoking. So things that you would need to protect or consider protecting, depending on the nature of your business. Not an exhaustive list, but quite an extensive one. Well, if you have commercial premises, you need to cover the buildings. You would need to cover the vehicles, which could be vans or cars. Stock, i.e. raw materials. Fixtures and fittings. If you had a warehouse operation, perhaps, or distribution, you would have stuff stored on racking. Business equipment. The electronic point of sale, the EPOS systems, some of those systems cost £25,000. So I've had a situation where someone's given me a figure for all of their business equipment, but missed off the EPOS, and I've had to raise it with them. And that's not a criticism, it's just, it's easy to miss things. And again, going back to who is the specialist, perhaps someone would easily miss something like an EPOS system. Other electricals in the business, what are their values? Computer systems, laptops, the goods in transit themselves. If you actually look at someone who's in a manufacturing business, the throughput of turning something from raw material to finished article will have a value, and that needs to be covered whilst it's on the business premises. But sometimes there's the blind spot that people overlook. Well, what happens if the items are accidentally damaged whilst in transit? And that's where the goods in transit comes in. Again, depending on the business process, plant and tools cover, including forklift trucks, CNC lathes. These items are very, very expensive, and again can be overlooked. If someone is just renting premises, quite often a landlord would make it a condition of the rental agreement that the tenant is responsible for glass. Thanks, Mr. or Mrs. Landlord. And that's an easy get out for you on your insurance. So if the tenant has been made via the lease responsible for the glass, the cost of replacement windows in commercial premises is staggering, because quite often it has to be toughened, or safety glass meeting a certain British kite mark standard. And you know, a window can cost £2,000 to £4,000, depending on the size of it. Okay. What about shop frontage? The bit that lets people know that you're actually out there on the high street, the signage for the building, all of those things. Who's arranging the insurance? Question mark. If the answer is, I don't know, then quite often the finger's actually pointing at you, the business owner. It's you that needs to arrange the insurance for those things. Okay. And again, hopefully as I've gone through so far, you'll start and feel that this is something where, whilst not a minefield, maybe having someone who does this all day, every day, asking you questions will help out or provide a list where you can see really everything that you need to protect. No two businesses are the same. I'm pleased to report, otherwise I would have fallen asleep over the last 40 years. I like meeting new people because everybody has a story. Everybody's business is unique. Everybody has challenges. And insurance is there not to get in the way, it's actually there to help people. Okay, so that's making sense of it all. Okay, Mike, if we could actually go back a bit.
Yeah, I think you made a good point there, Jeff. I think earlier on about the importance of getting an expert involved, and we've even had a comment on the workplace from Pete Evans about the importance of that. We all do have our areas of expertise, so using the people who know what they're talking about is so vital, and kind of part of the reason we do a lot of these sessions is people who have these levels of expertise in all sorts of different areas. So I think it's a great point to make. Yeah, excellent. I really appreciate that point from Pete. Thank you. Okay, so before we just go on and open it up a little bit, I just wanted to go through some of the covers because there are names for things in insurance, not jargon, specific names, but it will come across as jargon to a lot of people. And I just wanted to put a little bit of meat on the bones in terms of what some of these covers actually are there to do. Okay, so I'll do that now. So public liability insurance. What is that all about? Okay, so what that's about is a business, and we've covered within entity the broad 4 different types of business. This is about protecting the business in the situation where an employee, particularly, is the victim of an accident, okay, or there's been some damage, or there's been a death in the workplace. And this is about getting some protection around the business in case these eventualities arise. The next one, which I mentioned, is compulsory, with one or more staff member or one or more director, or sorry, more than one director, shall I say. Employer's liability is illness or injury in the performance of duties. Okay, so the differentiation between the two is if somebody is trying to hold you responsible for an accident where you're involved, or they claim you're involved, that could be them visiting you in your workplace, or you being out and about in the performance of your duties. The public liability covers accident situations, damage situations, and at worst scenario, death situations. The employer's liability is much more about you in the workplace and your duty of responsibility to protect your staff in the event of illness or injury that they suffer in the performance of their duties working for you or with you. Sounds a bit grand, but that's what that does. Professional indemnity, one of my favourite areas of cover, being a train spotter in insurance. If the client claims that you gave them the wrong advice or an inadequate service, they can claim against you, or will try and claim against you. And professional indemnity insurance protects you against those eventualities. An awful lot of people these days are involved in advice giving. So my advice, pardon the pun, is if you are involved in advice giving, make sure that you are protected with professional indemnity insurance. The next one I wanted to talk about is direct. Jeff, do you mind asking a question around that?
Yeah, you can.
So obviously advice, I think most people kind of assume that's relating to, say, financial advice or the type of things you do. Is there any other areas that, you know, it might be in kind of marketing or somewhere like that, that maybe people don't think that they actually do provide advice when they do?
I would answer that like this, Mike. If a sub definition of the professional indemnity cover is if a client claims that they suffer direct or indirect financial loss caused by the misadvice by you, then they've probably got a valid claim. So if you take your marketing scenario that you've just given and think about where the person could give wrong advice or point somebody in the wrong direction, yeah, that's really the area where the tension point arises, where the client, the client is effectively saying somewhere down the line, I've made a business decision based on the advice that you've given me, and I've suffered a financial loss. I want you to put that right. Or when I mentioned inadequate service, well, there's a broad brush, and unfortunately, because it's a broad brush, a client could come back to you and say they're not happy because of inadequate service. Now, most companies in the second example would say, right, within reason, what can we do to put that right? Now, that might involve an element of rework at your expense, yeah, i.e. you're losing your profit margin on that piece of work. But what that is doing is two things. It's showing goodwill, it's protecting the good name of your business, and it's avoiding the need to make a claim under your professional indemnity insurance. But the wrong advice bit is as wide as it is deep. My experience over many, many years is that things run along, perhaps for the whole lifetime of an individual or a business, and there's never a claim under professional indemnity insurance. But when there is, the size of the claim is quite high. And the reason that the size of the claim is quite high is if it's gone all the way through the claims checking and validation procedure, the insurance company is eventually putting their hands up and going, we have a valid claim here and we need to pay it. And the quantum of those claims can be thousands of pounds. I hope somewhere, Absolutely. Mike, I hope somewhere in there, buried in there, Mike, is nearly the answer to your question.
No, absolutely, Jeff. And with that, we've had another question actually in from Karen, who's asked obviously something specific around what she does, but I'm sure it's relevant to a lot of people. So, as you know, Jeff, Karen, she trains and coaches people. So, she has an issue with intellectual property, and also deliver most of her training online via a training platform. Is there any specific forms of cover that she needs to consider? And also, should she consider data loss? As you can imagine, most of her resources are actually stored electronically.
Yeah, I'll answer the second bit of that in a few minutes, because talking about cyber insurance is further down my list of stuff I want to talk about. No worries. On the first bit, though, without sidestepping the issue, if Karen falls into the category that I mentioned earlier of not having business insurance, and again, that's a rhetorical question, by the way, Karen, not having business insurance, or perhaps just not reviewed it recently, then Karen needs to sit down with myself or somebody like me and review that. But there's a bit in there, and until I sat down or someone sat down with Karen, we couldn't get into a specific advice/solution situation. So I'm not going to do that now, but definitely knowing Karen and what Karen does, there are covers around professional indemnity and cyber insurance that would really hit the mark in helping protect Karen. But it wouldn't be one or the other. There would be a number of considerations.
I think the interesting thing as well, Jeff, is kind of going back to your earlier point about reviewing your cover now, I know that from knowing Karen that she's started to do more of her training online, obviously mainly due to the current situation we're in. I'm sure
Yes.
a lot of us have changed the way we do business in the last 6 months, and maybe that's something that's probably very, very relevant for just about all businesses to kind of at least review if they've still got the right stuff in place.
Yes, I totally agree with you. I totally agree with you. If I could just briefly, Mike, just go back to myself in terms of not taking my own advice or my own medicine.
Perfect.
When it comes to things like mortgages, building society accounts, bank accounts, or even my car insurance, which I have with AXA and have had for a couple of years without shopping around, I'm not taking my advice in my private life in those respects, but did you get that?
Oh, Jeff, we just lost your last bit then. So could you just
Right.
repeat that last bit? Sorry.
Yeah, sure. I'm saying we're not here talking about my private life or what everyone else does or doesn't do out of work. We're talking full on here about really considering what your business needs, and not only considering what your business needs now, but remembering at the anniversary, it's not just the haggle. I'm saying this with a smile on my face. It's not the haggle in quotation marks around what the renewal premium is. It's about using the renewal as the trigger point to sit down again and just calmly and in an unrushed way review your business and making sure that the insurances that you had 12 months ago are still fit for purpose going forward. And, perhaps you need to amend them. A classic example, Mike, would be somebody who does parcel distribution. If they've won 2 or 3 new contracts, some of those contracts might be that they also do the fulfillment for the client. So what that means is they would hold the stock of a client who does mail order business. They'd hold the client's stock on their shelves and they would do the dispatch of the order. So the question there is, who's insuring the client's stock? Well, the answer is that the distribution company would need to increase their stock level to reflect how much they were holding for the client. So that's that. Now let's just get back to a couple more of these things, because I want to make sure people have been fully informed. The next one is directors and officers cover. So I mentioned professional indemnity helps cover your business in the event of alleged wrong advice or alleged inadequate service. Directors and officers cover covers losses normally of a legal nature, where the directors, because of their titles and the roles they perform, if they're in a situation where they're in court and caught up in a legal situation there, the cost of the legal costs can be recouped, because obviously if a business is being sued, you can literally see the numbers going around on a dial and it ends up with a big number. So normally, particularly for limited companies, my advice would be always to consider not just professional indemnity cover, but directors and officers cover. And myself and my colleague Mark quite often see fairly large businesses that have bought professional indemnity, and tongue-in-cheek that might be because they're self-served 10 years ago. It might be because their friend said it was one of the covers they needed, or it might be that part of the advice given from an independent commercial insurance broker was that you need professional indemnity. However, if it was the latter option, then that broker should probably also have recommended directors and officers cover. They do 2 different things, but they do dovetail together in terms of helping protect the business. The next thing I want to talk about, which Karen touched on, and Mike, you touched on, which is cyber insurance. Now, this is really interesting. This is almost like, if anyone remembers Top of the Pops, where they occasionally used to say, straight in the top 10 is such and such. So to me, cyber insurance feels a bit like that. In 5 years ago, nobody was talking about cyber insurance, and now nearly everybody's talking about cyber insurance. So this helps mitigate situations with electronic trading, and that could be electronic trading in terms of the delivery of training modules, i.e. what Karen does as part of her role. Malicious data breaches and malicious cyber hacks. Now, in both of these scenarios, reinstatement of data or client records can quite often result from somebody breaching your system or a malicious cyber hack. Now, if anyone's ever been through this, and I hope none of the people involved in this little meeting today, or people viewing it on catch up later, I hope nobody's ever been victim of a cyber attack, but I've had a couple of clients who have. I'll quickly tell you what that involved. So one of my clients pays all of their suppliers monthly. They have 3 or 4 reoccurring orders for raw materials, and those bills are thousands of pounds a month, sometimes say between 20 and 100,000, depending on the seasonality of the work. Now, somehow, cyber criminals got into their system, went into the individual purchase ledgers for these reoccurring suppliers and altered the sort code and account number held on file. So what this meant was that the next time the payment was due the following month, the payment wasn't made to these reoccurring people, it was actually made to the cyber criminals. And the total size of the loss was £120,000. Now, question, do you think that client had cyber insurance? The answer is no. Since that incident, that client's become a client of mine, and now that client does have cyber insurance. There are, my words, 3 levels of cover in cyber, so it would seem, almost like bronze, silver, and gold. You can have a little bit of cover, quite a bit of cover, an absolute platinum or gold cover. I'm mixing my metals up there, aren't I? You can have top-notch cover. And again, what you're covered for depends on 2 things: what you pay, and also what's important to you. If you just want your data reinstated, that would come at a cost. If you want somebody to be on hand to come out in the event of a data breach within X number of hours, that comes at a different cost. And if you want everything packaged together, that's at a higher cost. But interestingly, I've seen the scope of cover, i.e. what you can be covered for under cyber insurance, greatly widen in the last 4 or 5 years, because insurance companies, if you like, now understand what they are protecting. But the cost of the insurance hasn't gone up appreciably. So I'll say that again in case everybody thinks they've misheard or I've misspoken. Yes, in the world of insurance, you've got something there where the cover's widened, but the cost hasn't gone up. So that probably reflects how much business is done online and how much we rely on the online environment. The next thing to mention is goods in transit. I touched on it earlier, but this is loss or damage of goods being carried from A to B. Imagine a scenario, 2 vehicles collide, one's got goods on the back of it, those goods spill onto the road. Who pays for the goods that are now broken? Well, if it was the driver of the vehicle that didn't have the goods on, I would argue that they should pay because they were at fault and have suffered a loss, a consequential loss. The accidents caused the goods to fall off the lorry. However, that's a grey area. I may or may not be successful. I hope I would be. But if you've arranged goods in transit, then as the name suggests, the goods are covered whilst in transit. No argument. And again, anyone who's in haulage, logistics, distribution, wholesaling, anyone like that, it would be utter madness not to have goods in transit. But again, my colleague Mark and I, who work on new business, we regularly approach people to quote for their business, and when reviewing their insurance, we find that they don't have any goods in transit cover. The next one is a quick word on fleet. So there's a thing called mini fleet, and then obviously fleet. The reason I mention it is a lot of people think that you have to have, say, 5, 6 or more vehicles to have a fleet. That's not the case. If you have 2 business vehicles or more, you can have a mini fleet. On larger fleets, there's been an increasing use of technology in the last few years, particularly dash cam. Imagine a situation with an HGV. They get blamed for everything. If you have dash cam and there's an incident, it can quite often prove or disprove what's been disputed. Very reasonable in cost. You can get a dash cam and related systems for, £100 up over would get you a good one. Linked to dash cam, but completely separate, is telematics. This is about monitoring driver behavior. So you could have a scenario where at the end of 12 months, you've got 10 vehicles, driver each, but one driver or 2 drivers have caused 5 claims. Those drivers perhaps have also got 2 speeding convictions each. With telematics, depending on the program or system that you buy, it can tell you all sorts of things, such as, is the driver wearing a seatbelt at all times whilst driving? Is there harsh braking involved? Is the driver going over the speed limit regularly? If they're going over the speed limit regularly, is it by 1 or 2 miles an hour, or are they absolutely caning it and they're 10 miles an hour or more above? This isn't particularly to catch the drivers out. This is all about understanding what's going wrong. And then you can sit down with the driver and say to them, did you know you were doing this? Did you know you were doing that? Some of them will, some of them won't. But if you get them to modify their behavior, the knock-on effect is less claims, less cost of claims, and therefore the cost of the insurance, which is related to that, of course, becomes much more affordable. Landlords insurance. Someone could have 1 buy-to-let, somebody could have 10 buy-to-lets, somebody could have 10 buy-to-lets and 5 shops, or somebody could have office blocks. There's various covers available to landlords. The standard policy, like a home insurance in terms of the buildings, but also with options. Okay, so there would be property owners liability cover on there. There would also be options available to the landlord to protect the rent, which is probably an important consideration. Last 2 things to mention, travel insurance, okay? And group travel insurance, business travel insurance. There's a number of options available to cater for all of those things, but buying an annual business travel insurance policy if you're out and about in the UK, Europe and beyond, that makes sense, because the cost of the insurance compared to arranging a number of one-off insurances, it's a far better thing to do to arrange an annual policy. The last thing I wanted to do, and the thing I've deliberately saved to last, is business interruption cover. On one hand, it's terminally dull to talk about, but on the other hand, it's incredibly topical. The reason it's topical is that there is a current case going through the High Court whereby a number of insurers are offering a flawed defense, in my opinion, to we are not paying out to our policyholders for the COVID situation or the knock-on effect of the COVID situation. Now, without taking up too much time, a brief element of this High Court case, which is quite interesting, at least to me, is around the fact that under business interruption, you can have a thing called denial of access cover, which means you're not allowed into a specific area, or you're not, at micro or macro level, you're not allowed into a certain building, i.e. your own. Now, a number of people who run businesses have lodged what they believe to be valid claims with their insurance company. The stumbling block, however, seems to be that COVID-19 is a brand new pandemic situation, and hands up on behalf of the insurance industry, this has put a spotlight on the fact that the wording of certain policies in relation to business interruption cover is inadequate / hazy / grey. So the worst argument I've heard is we have a list of diseases and COVID isn't on that list, therefore we are not paying your claim. Now, if I was on the wrong end of that, I wouldn't be very happy. So this test case is going through, and I'm watching it with interest. Realistically, I don't think that, despite what I've just said, I don't think that the insurers are going to start offering COVID cover. But what it will do, from an industry perspective, it will mean that insurers revisit their wordings and become much clearer on the fact that things like COVID aren't covered. Now, that's a shame to hear that cover probably won't be available, but pragmatically, I would rather know at outset whether I was covered for something or not, rather than finding out where. I don't think anyone's trying to weasel out of a claim. It's just a case of this, we're in completely unforeseen circumstances with COVID. Okay, so that's the last cover that I want to go into. But on business interruption insurance, I just wanted to be clear on what that is, because I don't think I have been particularly so far. This is a form of insurance that you can arrange so that if you suffer a catastrophic incident, perhaps a fire, a flood, that sort of thing, and you physically can't trade from your current business premises either ever or for a prolonged period of time, you can effectively insure against that eventuality so that you receive a payment or staged payments that will either allow you to rebuild the premises and then trade, or relocate somewhere else, or rebuild the thing but temporarily be somewhere else and then come back to where you were once the thing's been completed. So it's a very, 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 very important cover. But again, I hope he's on the call, but my colleague Mark will attest, as I will, to the fact that a lot of people we sit down with, business interruption cover has never ever been mentioned to them, i.e. in the scenario of they've never thought about it, their friend, not surprisingly, is not mentioned. And disappointingly, if they have had independent commercial broking advice previously, their previous broker hasn't really spoken to them about it either. And I find that last point quite worrying, because that is something that should be mentioned. Okay. Lastly, before we move on, I just wanted to cover, okay, so those covers, how are they fulfilled? Okay, well, they're quite often packaged up, if you pardon the pun. So you can, if you're at the smaller end of business, you can buy effectively what's called a package policy, which can give you options to give you employer's liability cover if needed, public liability, professional indemnity, business equipment, even money cover if people are still receiving payments by money rather than electronically. There's another type of package, which is at the medium and larger end of things, called commercial combined. It's kind of like the package that I've just mentioned, but covers would include, but this isn't an exhaustive list, employer's liability, public liability, goods in transit, stock, computers, office contents, and if you own the buildings, obviously buildings insurance. Okay, so those are the two vehicles by which most policies can be delivered where more than one cover is required by the client. I hope that's clear. Okay, Mike, could you just flip on to the next slide, please? Okay, so this is the conclusion bit. What do I do? So my thoughts are, hopefully reflecting on what I've covered this morning, people go back to the homicide life on the street slide, which had the specialist on it. And in the specialist, there were three options. There was self-serve online, because you know a bit about insurance and you know everything that you need. There was also, my friend says I need, but quite often people only buy what the friend says that they need, and that can leave you wide open, as you'll have heard, to missing valuable covers. And then thirdly, seek out an independent financial consultant in terms of brokerage. That would be someone like me, an independent commercial insurance broker. But whatever someone should do, probably of those three options, the getting advice from an expert's probably the way forward. So I've put a bullet on there, do something. And really that's important, because whether someone has insurance, I've mentioned when I did the quiz at the start, it may be that the cover hasn't been reviewed, or it may be, worst case scenario, someone on this call or someone who watches later, or sorry, listens later, someone hasn't got any insurance at all, and that they're actually trading. Well, you're exposing yourself enormously there to a potential future financial loss. And the thing about financial losses is you don't know when they're going to happen. So in summary then, do something. Okay, do something. Okay, Mike, if you could just whiz on the next slide. Okay. And we'll whiz back to that in 1 second, but could you whiz on to the next slide? Just give people a minute to read that, and then we'll go back. Okay, enough of that. That's a real life Google review on our website from a real life client. And I know a number of Davids, but my particular thanks to that one. Okay, so conscious of time, Mike, I've covered a few questions. Also happy to cover questions offline on an ongoing basis, but as we're all on the phone now, or on the meeting now, are there any questions for me?
None at the moment, Jeff, but obviously we've been asking quite a lot as we've been going along. So
Yeah.
And you finished with 3 minutes to spare, which is about as perfect timing as it gets. So well done on that. Like I said, obviously, if anyone does have any questions, if you obviously you could see Jeff's contact details on the screen, but for whatever reason, if you don't know how to contact him, do let me know, and I can pass that on as well. Tag if it's under any of the things on the post on the social media or anything like that. Tag myself, tag Jeff in, and I'm sure we'll be able to try and answer the questions as we go along. So if there's no questions, Jeff, is there anything else you want to finish with?
No. I hope that I've helped make sense of insurance a little bit there. I'm acutely aware that it's not the most rock and roll subject, but I'm also, and trust me on this, I'm absolutely passionate to try and help people with their insurance, because I see so many horror stories. Not always the I haven't arranged my insurance, but I sometimes see horror stories where people haven't reviewed things, and I blame their broker for that as much as them. So yeah, I hope that was of some help to people. And if you do want to talk to me, not necessarily to get advice from me and buy from me, but initially, if you just have any questions, I'm here to help. It's a free service, and I'm glad to help. Have you.
That's fantastic, Jeff. Well, thank you. Firstly, thank you very much for your help with that, and I'm sure a lot of people will have really found that useful. So, thank you. Jeff, we do have a very last minute question. If you want to answer that, can you hear me, Jeff?
I can hear you, mate. Just call it out.
Yeah, perfect. So I have a question from David. Says, great presentation. He missed the first part, so not sure if he covered it. But relating to D&O cover, does the liability stop with the company if it's limited?
It's effectively the officers of the company. So that's why you would buy the cover in the first place, because you can independently be held accountable in relation to your position as a director of the company, which is why it's so important to buy the insurance.
Brilliant. Okay. Thank you, Jeff. So thank you, everyone, for watching, whether live or afterwards. But mostly thank you to Jeff for information. And if anyone does want to contact Jeff, I'm sure I'd be more than happy to speak to you later down the line. So thank you very much, Jeff. And thank you, everyone, for watching.
Thanks, mate. Take care.
Thanks. Bye-bye, everyone.